Great time. And hopefully next year.
And maybe even some of us older owners get help. But I'm back.
Yep. Let's go.
Who done stepped in the game at point blank range? Who done stepped in the game at point blank range? Who done stepped in the game? Stepped in the game. Stepped in the game.
So the interesting thing about being observant is that you tend to notice patterns, and those patterns are attributed to certain behaviors, and they are the result of certain behaviors, and sometimes the precursor and the reason and cause for certain behaviors. So in the time between now and the last ShadowCast, and actually a little bit before that, there's been a lot of hubbub going around, mostly due to Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft and their different announcements and what they plan on doing for the rest of the year. And some of those things are tied to types of bias that tend to go unnoticed by the unwary listener, viewer, or subscriber or reader to whatever outlet decides to disseminate information, if you will. So I've got a list of some things, some topics I want to address, and there's some common issues that I've seen and decided to speak on, since they're they're interesting. I feel like I'm the only person that notices these, but I'm fairly sure that other people may have as well. They just may have not talked about it before. So the first topic I want to get into is why Nintendo is such a whipping boy, and there's several reasons why. And there's several reasons that the hypocrisy just stretches so far. It's almost astounding in some cases. So one of the things that was brought to me by a fellow Google Plus user and another user on my Twitter feed was that Nintendo gets dissed too much for certain things, and we all know, the Wii U, as far as selling the same amount of consoles as Wii, that didn't happen. And some people tend to equate that to success or not success, or things like that. And it's kind of hard to tell with a company like Nintendo that operates on profit all the time anyway. So regardless of whether they sell 10 million or 100 million, as long as they're not selling it at a loss, they still make money. So one of the things was people want to talk about Wii U and all these issues, and one of those issues was that the Wii U didn't have a good launch lineup, and I'm wondering if they played the same Wii U that I did, because Wii U in 2012 had more games stretched from the launch time in November until, say, February or March of the next year in 2013 than Microsoft and Sony had for their respective consoles an entire year. Granted, yes, there were certain third-party titles that showed up at launch for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, but they also showed up for Wii U. Those same franchises, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Batman, things like those all showed up during that time frame. Meanwhile, the Batman game in question, the sequel or whatever, that did not show up on Wii U, it took 2 years to show up on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So it wasn't necessarily a launch window. Meanwhile, there were upwards of 20 to 40 games from the time, and these are retail releases from the time that the Wii U launched until March of 2013, and half as much appeared with regards to Xbox One and PlayStation 4. To the point where certain press outlets would do things like talk about the indie scene and how great indie games are for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, because there was nothing else to do on those platforms at the end of 2013. Whereas the Wii U, towards the end of 2012, had indie games as well as retail releases. So I'm trying to figure out exactly why they said there wasn't a good launch lineup. You had a Tekken game at Wii U launch. You had a Ninja Gaiden game at Wii U launch. You had a Batman game at Wii U launch. You had an Assassin's Creed game at Wii U launch. You had a Call of Duty game at Wii U launch. And shortly thereafter, you had other titles. You had Wonderful 101 and other titles like that. So I don't. What some other people are saying doesn't really add up. Ubisoft showed up with an Assassin's Creed game and Zombie U at launch, off the rip. You had a Scribblenauts game. There were so many. There was a breadth of titles with regards to something for a elementary school kid to a high school kid to an adult to play for that entire year or less than a year time frame in that console's lifespan. So I don't get that. We launched it over 25 games. There's no reason for anybody to suggest anything like that unless they have memory lapse or something to that effect. So all the time Nintendo gets dissed for a lack of third party support compared to Sony and Microsoft, right? So around the end of 2013, the beginning of 2014, that's when we started to see major third party titles avoid that console for all the wrong reasons. There were a lot of excuses that the PR guys of certain publishers whatnot came up with that didn't really add up. But when it comes down to it, Nintendo has a lack of third party support. That's going to be the official story, right? Okay. So if that's such a bad thing, why isn't the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One getting dissed for the lack of first party support compared to Nintendo? That never seems to be the argument. Like I never really see a complaint about the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One saying, "Oh my God, the first party games are shit," or there isn't there that many of them. Nintendo has all the first party games. You need first party games. Well, at least Microsoft admitted that. They said they're going to try to start going that route and do more exclusive stuff because that sets the difference apart. That's the whole reason you have a console. Otherwise, we just all play PC games. So it's just funny to me that all the doom and gloomers, if you will, on YouTube, social media, and other parts of the internet, they're clearly dooming Nintendo for not having third party support. They're assuming that the Wii U never had it when it did at launch. They're assuming that Nintendo's successor or the NX, whatever it's going to be, will also have the same issues since it's going to be different from the other two, or so they think. That means that's the end of all things. And I'm trying to figure out because a lot of major third party games didn't really make it to the Wii as well. But third parties end up being forced to do something for that platform because it was a massive success without them and their major efforts. So it's just, once again, that's a case of amnesia for those that did not understand that all of a sudden third party means it is the beginning and the end of a video game console manufacturer. That may be highly important for the PlayStation or the Xbox brand, but not necessarily in Nintendo's case. But it is very important for the first party to have some type of software out there to drive the marketplace and to be able to tell these developers or show these developers, give them examples of what's possible on the platform. So if it was not for Halo, people would have never known that Xbox could be a great place for shooters. Had there never been any Sony published or heavily backed third person shooters on the original PlayStation, PlayStation 2, or any original Sony efforts in the JRPG area, there wouldn't be an influx of JRPGs on that platform, because there was no example to show them that, hey, this is what you can do. Nintendo alone on the Wii U has covered the RPG, sports, shooter, platformer, and the third person action game genre, this in the 8th generation. They have shown every third party developer what's possible and what can sell well on this platform, and to no avail, because they didn't want to follow it. But the main point being, if Nintendo gets this for this not having its third party support, or the lack thereof, then Sony and Microsoft should also be dissed for the lack of their first party support. Microsoft and Sony shouldn't be closing first party studios. They should be opening more of them and creating more first party games, because at the end of the day, it's actually cheaper. You publish the games in-house, and whatever money that goes to marketing and things like that, it goes directly back in your pockets. You don't have to worry about getting a percentage of licensing fees or anything like that. All the money goes directly back to you. You don't have to worry about brokering deals and making sure that certain publisher is gonna put insert X game on your platform, where if you cover that genre yourself, it's already spoken for, even if they don't step up. I mean, that's just one of the things. Who comes up with these rules? Who the hell decides what counts? Why does third party support only count? Why is that the first thing somebody types on the internet when they want to complain about Nintendo? And why do they never complain about first party support when it comes to Sony or Microsoft? Anytime that's brought up in a discussion that I have anywhere on Google Plus, Twitter, or what have you, the conversation immediately deviates away from that, and I find that kind of interesting. So the other issue is just more ragging on the Wii U. Reasons why people didn't buy it, and maybe it wasn't successful or something like that. They talk about the sales, which I don't understand, because sales should be irrelevant. If you're a gamer, you want to buy the console so you can play the games on it. You shouldn't want to buy a console based on other people buying it. That doesn't make any sense. One of the other complaints was that the Wii U had a paltry amount of storage, that being 32 gigabytes of flash storage on the higher version of the platform. And that's a huge misconception, and I'll break it down to you. First of all, by directly comparing 32 gigs versus the 500 gigs that these other two platforms launched with, you're assuming that the game save size, cache size, and all those things are exactly the same across the board. So you complain when Nintendo is different, and then when there comes to other things that we know are different, you assume that they're the same, or you won't accept the fact that they're actually different and certain things are different for a reason. For the longest time, since the inception of Nintendo using disc format with the GameCube, Nintendo has been very cautious about their file sizes and file compression for different resources and games on disc, mainly because they're very, very, very anal with regards to load time. They want to make sure that is minimized as much as possible. They want to make sure as soon as you turn on your console, you can go directly to a game, something that you cannot do on the other two platforms, by the way. And they want to make sure that when you go into that game, you're not dealing with hefty load times that the consumer has to experience in between levels in a game, or starting a game up for the first time, or in between certain battles or whatever. There's no reason for you to have a really, really epic battle in this really, really large world, and you have to go get a sandwich in between different areas that you go explore. that is what they're all about. So they make everything on their platform in very, very large amounts of small chunks, if you will. So there's a better compression algorithm going on and drastically smaller file sizes. So you got a game like Super Mario 3D World, which has 4K textures, 8K textures in some places, really, really good lighting, um, good shadowing, things like that. Really, really high quality textures all around it in that game. Yet the entire game's file size is less than 3 gigabytes versus, I don't know, some other titles on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One in the same genre that are anywhere between 25 and 50 gigs. And in addition to that, those games must be installed directly to your drive. You can't play them off the disc. So that hard drive space must be used before you can even press start to play the game. Which also means you have to wait for it to install, which can be a considerable amount of time. Go make 2 or 3 sandwiches, or I don't know, a 7 course meal, and that is what you're dealing with at this point in time. So even if Wii U games were the same file size or whatnot, if the games were 25 gigs apiece, like they are for other platforms or more, the obvious solution would be for you to buy the game, the disc version of that game. Because then you wouldn't have to worry about installing it or anything of that nature. You can just run the game directly from the disc. And there's 25 gigs you don't have to use to install on that platform. The other two have to do that. So when you're talking about 25 to 50 gig games on the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4, you're talking about as few as 10 titles being installed, and you're running out of disk space already. And certain titles such as NBA 2K13 or 2K14, 2K15, it's up to 90 gigs once you install all the updates. 90 gigs just sitting around. Almost 100 gigs for one title. That's 1/5 of the hard drive for one game. Versus a first party Nintendo platformer, which is 1/16 of the file size on the Wii U. So it's a little bit odd when you talk about, oh well, you want to compare specs, but you got to compare the specs for what they actually do. There's no reason to complain about something not having that much disk space if, number one, you don't have that many Wii U games, or that many Wii U games installed to begin with, or that many downloaded to begin with. And if you have disk games, you don't even really need that. You don't really need them for save states, because save states aren't really that big on that platform. And the virtual console games, they're minuscule in size as well. For reference, on my current Wii U right now, I have about 44 titles. Most of them are indie and or virtual console titles. I have about maybe 4 retail games that are installed on my Wii U. One of them is a very large one, and that's Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And that's the only game that made me use an external hard drive, which is the other point in case at this point. Nintendo knew that their hard drive space was going to be pennies per gig pretty soon in the future, if it wasn't already at the time in 2012. Knowing that ahead of time, they just said, hey, you could just throw a USB 2.0 external hard drive in here, or have whatever type of external storage you want, and that will resolve any issues that you have. So when you want to download these texture packs for Xenoblade Chronicles X, or whatever type of games that you want to download that are very large in size, you have an external drive that's there, or a thumb drive, or whatever you want to use, that you can save all your data to, and there's no issues with regards to that. You can continue playing like you normally would. And you will buy it for a lot cheaper than, say, a Microsoft branded hard drive for $140. So that's one of the things. And what I also don't understand is the other platforms ended up doing that as well. So the size of the internal drive is irrelevant. they're all three of them are going to be surpassed if you plan on downloading all your games and you never want to buy any retail titles. It's irrelevant at that point. You're going to need an external drive. So why even compare that on a spec sheet to say what's better and what's not? Wii U is drastically different between those other two platforms. It handles files differently than those other two platforms do, and installation of games is only necessary if you download the game directly to the system. I just really don't understand that either. So one of the other things that people complain about is that the platform is only it's a commercial failure because it's a commercial failure, if you will, because it sold 13 million in almost 4 years time, which is kind of it had two platforms come and outsell it in a shorter period of time, which is to be expected because the fate for that console was sealed in 2011 when you have famed game reviewers and industry analysts saying they do not know what the Wii U is or is the gamepad for the Wii, which I don't understand because they saw and played the game console at that event 2 years in a row. How do you hold a controller, have this console sitting in the background, see that the console is running games with HD graphics, and not know that this is a dedicated games platform? Never mind the fact that Wii U, that the Wii U representatives that Nintendo hired there specifically tell you that this is a new platform for Nintendo and that it is the next way that you're going to play games. I think that kind of means that yeah, we're moving away from Wii. So yeah, it only sold 13 million as of the last investor meeting that Nintendo had. However, every Wii U was sold at a profit from the beginning because as long as you bought a game, according to the Reggie Fils-Aimé, the Reginator, Nintendo was making a profit on every system sold. And we all know nobody buys a game console to not buy a game. You're going to eventually spend money on something. Otherwise, why are you buying the console? So as long as you bought one game, the Wii U sold at a profit. And right about now, the amount of games that Nintendo sells annually for Wii U versus the amount of consoles they sell is about 2 to 1. And their current install base software tie-in ratio is about 7 to 1. So Wii U is pretty much about 7 times profitable per each console sold based on those numbers. So no, Wii U isn't a commercial failure because it's making them money. Commercial failure means you lose money. Wii U did not. So I don't get where that type of statement comes from either. Then you have the fact that Nintendo's first party games outsell most multi-platform AAA titles. Multi-platform. There are multi-platform AAA games or called AAA games from these quote unquote major studios that sell less across 3 platforms, PS4, Xbox One, PC, than Nintendo does on one platform. So a console that's only sold 13 million units is selling more titles than a third party game with well over 100 million base users out there, counting PC. If anything's embarrassing or anything isn't doing well, it will be the opposite of what these guys are saying. Now, on the other hand, you have Sony, which came in over 126 million in the whole last fiscal year. They just now made up for it this year with 1.6 billion to the investors that they owed from last year. It's just a stark contrast when you talk about what's a commercial failure and what isn't. The PlayStation 3 cost Sony at least $3 billion in the 7th generation. Nobody called it a commercial failure. I wonder why that is. there are more of these double standards I'm going to talk about in other videos, but I figured I wouldn't drag this one out. But yeah, it's just interesting. When you really get down to it, all these complaints, when they're fit the other way, why won't you address that? Do you play games to have fun or to impress other people?